All right, well, let's dive into the Word of God. We're going to go to John chapter 11. John chapter 11. Praise God. And today we're going to talk about three questions to help us embrace truth. Three questions to help us embrace truth. Let me be honest with you, if I may. The truth is sometimes hard to deal with. Accepting truth is not always easy, right? Maybe you go to the doctor and the doctor shares some truth with you and you're like, I don't receive that, I don't take that, and maybe they share some news with you, or maybe something maybe not as severe or as difficult. For example, when I was a teenager, I'm musically inclined, as you can see, and I play a few different instruments, and I praise God for that. I'm self-taught for the most part. There was a teacher here or there that pretended to teach me something, but I really wasn't listening. But I'm self-taught for the most part. And I thought growing up, you know what? At some point, I am going to be a professional musician. And my dream was to not so much tour and be on a big stage. That wasn't necessarily my thing. My dream was to be a studio musician, have my own recording studio where people can come in and record. And I thought I'd be able to one day do this professionally for a living. Now, as life progressed, things happened in life that didn't really lead me in that direction, and that's why I'm here at 46 years old pastoring a church. I'm not a professional musician. But there was a point in my musical career where I had to face the facts. I had to be honest. I had to take a real good look in the mirror, and I had to look at Rob and say, hey, Rob, let me just be real honest with you right now. This whole dream about being a musician, it turns out, Rob, you're good, you're okay, but you're not that good. Like, you can do music a little bit, but maybe not at that professional level, Rob. Something along the way, happened, and you're just not gonna be that guy, right? And I don't know about you, if you've ever had to confront something like that. I think as we get older, some of those things start happening. We're like, okay, yeah, that's not gonna happen, and this is not gonna happen. Hopefully you don't have too many of those in your life. But for me, I realized, and I had to be really honest with myself and say, okay, Rob, you've done good, but it's not, this is pretty much the end of the road in terms of, this is going to be a professional career, or this is going to be just a hobby that you end up spending a lot of money on behind your wife's back. Anyway, don't tell her. But anyway, so I thought, there just came those points. And in our lives, we have those points of reality that kind of like Mike Tyson says, right? Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And then you realize, wait a second, it's all different. And we get to these places in life where we realize the truth sometimes is hard to embrace. So today, I want to give you three questions you need to ask yourself about the truth so that you can learn to embrace the truth. Not maybe an easy sermon, because embracing the truth, again, it's not always an easy thing to do. Last week, we talked about Lazarus, the testimony of Lazarus, where Jesus raises him from the dead, right? And Jesus performs this amazing miracle. And you would think that everybody would be happy about this miracle. You would think that everybody would be singing praises to Jesus, but really, it wasn't quite like that. This was a true miracle. People knew that Lazarus was dead. They knew he was in the tomb for 4 days. They knew that Jesus came, said, Lazarus, come out, and Lazarus came out. They know that this guy was dead. Now he's alive. These are all indisputable facts. These are all realities. This is truth at its best, right in front of your face. But yet, at the end of chapter 11, we have three different responses to that truth. We have three different responses. And I'm afraid that some of us fall into one of those three categories. I'm going to tell you what the responses were, and then we'll get really into the message. The first response was easy. The first response was there was a group of believers, people that believed and put their trust in Jesus because they saw this great miracle. Then there was another group of people. These people were, they didn't become believers, and they didn't really become doubters either. They were just kind of indifferent to the truth. So what they did was that they went back and they told the Pharisees. Remember, the Pharisees are the people that don't like Jesus because Jesus is threatening their power, because they're the people in power, and everything that Jesus is doing now is bringing more and more people to Jesus, and they don't like Jesus. So these are the Pharisees. These people, they were just apathetic to the truth. These people were just indifferent. Like, we're not believers, but we're not believers. And then the third group of people, they were just straight out deniers. They were complete deniers about the facts. And we're going to go to John chapter 11. We're going to start at verse 45, where it says this: "Therefore, many of the Jews had come to visit Mary, and had seen what Jesus did." And what did they do? They believed him. They believed him. They couldn't deny it. There was no refuting this. This was absolutely 100% true. This man was dead. Now he's alive, and it's because of Jesus. So they put their trust in Jesus. Now, the first question, when it comes to truth, the first question you need to ask yourself, and this might seem a little odd to some of us, but the first question you need to ask yourself is, do I believe the truth? Now, some of us, we're so skeptical that even when I say that, it sounds a little strange. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm asking you that when you see truth, do you believe the truth? Some of us are already wrestling with that. What? Do I believe the truth? Yes. Do you believe truth? When the facts are laid out, do you just say, I can't fight it, I need to believe it? Right? Let me tell you something about truth. Truth is meant to be believed. You should believe truth. Don't believe lies, which is what we tend to do. Don't believe lies, believe truth. You need to ask yourself, do I believe the truth? And now, I told you last week that there's a difference between faith, and there's a difference between faith and knowledge. There's a difference between what you believe and what you know. There's a difference there. And I am a person that, I like knowledge. I don't know about you. Do you like knowledge? I like smarts, and I like learning things. I like learning things. By God's grace, I'm a person that, God has given me the opportunity to study, and I've been able to study, and by God's grace, I can talk of that, and trust me, totally by God's grace, that I have any title to my name. But by God's grace, I have studied and I have earned my degree, and I'm thankful to God for that. And I say that humbly. And I'll tell you, not only that, but I really like, beyond school, every year I go through several books. Like I'm just always consuming information. I think I have way more information than I really actually need. I just consume information. Just give it to me. Like I could literally go on all day learning. I never used to be like that. But now as I'm older, I love learning. And it's crazy because the more you learn, the more you realize there's still so much more to learn, right? But I love learning, and I love education, and I love knowledge, and I preach education to my kids. I say, hey, get educated. Whatever you want to do in life, just go and get educated. I'd rather you have a degree and not need it than to need a degree and not have it. Just go ahead, get your education. I want you to know that, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound maybe strange to you. I love knowledge. What I'm about to tell you bothers me just as much as it may bother you. The reality is that Scripture elevates faith over knowledge. It elevates what you believe over what you know. It puts what you believe higher than what you know. Now, I think they go hand in hand. I'm not saying forsake knowledge and just believe stuff, because obviously you got to know stuff before you believe it, right? So there's got to be some level of knowledge there. But Scripture seems to emphasize belief over knowledge. I'll tell you what I mean. With Martha, Jesus had a conversation with her when Lazarus was still dead. He was in the grave. And Jesus has a conversation with her, and he's telling her, listen, your brother is going to resurrect. He's going to be fine, right? He's going to have life again. And she responds and says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. She says, I know. In other words, I perceive, I've learned that on the last day, we're all going to resurrect. And Jesus comes back, and he says, no, Martha. He says, listen, I am the resurrection and I am the life. And then he goes back to her. He says, do you believe that? It's not about what you know. It's about what you believe. He says, Martha, it's not what you know, what you believe. Do you believe it? And it's when she says, I believe it. When she says, I believe that you are the resurrection. When she says, I believe that you are the life, then Jesus can move forward and perform the miracle. So Jesus says, again, he elevates faith, he elevates belief over knowledge. I'll give you some more examples. In the Garden of Eden, there were 2 trees, in case you missed that. There were 2 trees in the middle of the garden. There was the tree of life, and then there was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the tree that God said don't eat from was the tree, what? Of knowledge of good and evil. It was the tree of knowledge. You could eat all day from the tree of life. There's a tree of life, knock yourself out. Go to town, clown. Just enjoy all the fruit there. But the tree of knowledge of good and evil, don't eat that one. Don't have that one. Why? God wanted them to put their faith and trust in him. You don't need to know about good and evil. That's basically what he was saying. You don't need to know about good and evil. And the serpent, you remember he came over, he says, you know what the thing is, that God doesn't really want you to be like him, knowing good and evil. The reality is that they had everything they needed. They had God, they had food, they had a garden. It was beautiful. They were going to live forever. Did they need anything from that tree? The answer is absolutely not. They didn't even need knowledge. But one thing they did need, they needed faith. They needed to put their trust in God. And had they trusted in God, we wouldn't be here in this situation right now. We wouldn't be in this fallen world had they simply put their faith, their trust in Jesus. I'll tell you a little bit more. The Bible speaks negatively at times about knowledge. Don't get me wrong. It also speaks positively of knowledge. But there are times when the Bible actually speaks negatively of knowledge. The Bible never does that with faith. The Bible never speaks negatively about you putting your hope and your faith in Jesus. Ecclesiastes 1:18, it says, for with much knowledge come much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Solomon tells us that sometimes the more you know, it's not the more you grow. Sometimes the more you know, the more grief you have. My wife's uncle lives in New York City. And he says that in living in New York, especially in these days, he says he has to turn off the news. He says, I have stopped watching news. He goes, because I won't be able to live in New York if I continue to watch news. And you can see that with the crime rate, the way it's going you watch the news, it's almost better that you don't know, right? Because if you know, then you'll say, I'll never again, ever, never, ever visit New York City again. And I'll be honest with you, I think I've watched a little too much news on New York. I got to go to New York later on today, and I'm a little freaked out. All right, but sometimes it's like the less you know, the better you are for it, right? Kids are so happy. They don't have all the knowledge you have, and they're just excited about life. Like sometimes you look at a kid and you're like, oh man, if I could just be like that kid. No, sometimes the more wisdom, the more knowledge we gain, the more grief. 1 Corinthians 8:1, speaking of knowledge, it says that we all possess knowledge. But knowledge puffs up while love builds up. So sometimes, you get a little too knowledgeable. You go to seminary, you get a degree, all of a sudden, you're this Bible scholar, your head gets really big, and all of a sudden now knowledge puffs up, and you think you're something when you're really nothing. Knowledge will tend to puff us up. Not that knowledge is bad. I'm not saying that. There's other scriptures where knowledge is a good thing, and the Bible speaks positively. But again, I'm trying to show you that the Bible actually elevates belief over knowledge. And the last thing is this. You're not saved, or none of us are saved because of what we know. But instead, we're saved because of what we what? Believe. What we believe is what saves us. Romans 10:9 and 10 says, if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart, it says believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. You will be saved, for it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. When you came to Jesus, maybe you had very little knowledge. When you came to Jesus, you didn't have little knowledge, but you had faith. And that's what brought you to Christ. You came to faith in Christ. Now that you're a believer, and now that you have some faith, I do encourage you, learn something. So don't just stay there, because I don't want you to think that knowledge is all bad. I think that knowledge is good. But when it comes to faith, believing versus knowledge, belief trumps knowledge. So when it comes to the truth, do you believe it? These people were confronted with a truth. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And what did they do? They did the best thing that you can do when you're confronted with truth. Now you got to make sure it is truth. But once you're confronted with truth, it's a simple thing. Just believe it. Just believe it. Some of us will believe the truth. Others of us, though, will do what the second group did. And it's that they didn't deny it, but they were just simply indifferent to the truth. We'll go to verse 46, John 11:46. It says this, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So some of them, they had the truth in front of them. They could have believed the truth. They didn't believe the truth. If anything, they went and they instigated another fight with the Pharisees. They instigated. So they weren't not believing. They were just apathetic. And they were just indifferent to the truth. It's like the truth is there. Hey, that's good. How many of us have friends? And you don't have to answer out loud, but how many of us have friends that, man, they sound like Christians. They believe what Christians believe. They have the same values, or they say at least they have the same values we have, but they're not serving the Lord like you are. And you scratch your head. You're like, but when I sit down with you, it seems like we agree. But that whole idea of them now putting their hope and their faith in Jesus, it's like it's like that little hurdle. Like what is it? Anybody here have a relative or a family member or a friend like that? Man, you're like a Christian, but you're not a Christian because you haven't put your faith in Jesus. Some people, when it comes to faith, it's not that they don't believe, it's just that they're indifferent. Like it doesn't matter to me. Like it's fine. These people were simply indifferent. They were simply apathetic about it. They just wanted to remain neutral. They just wanted to be neither here nor there. And let me tell you something about apathy. Although you might think that apathy is neutral, apathy is not neutral. To not be a believer, even if you're just apathetic or even if you're just indifferent, automatically puts you in the non-believer category. I'll tell you what I mean. Jesus put it this way in Matthew 12:30. He said, whoever is not with me is against me. So Jesus doesn't give us room to be apathetic. Jesus doesn't give us room to be indifferent. He says, if you're not with me, you're against me. If you are not part of my people, then you're not, you're against me. And whoever does not gather with me scatters. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world. In other words, if you are apathetic because you're just simply conforming to this world, he says, don't conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Matthew 16:24 says, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. What was Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, it's either you're in or you're out. There's no in between. There's no, I'm not really sure. There's none of that. When it comes to faith in Jesus, you either put your trust and your faith, you either believe him or you don't believe him. You don't get to be an ally of Christianity and say, oh, I'll be saved because, my grandma, she's saved and she goes to church. Like I'm saved because, my relatives. No. That's just not the way it works, my friend. It doesn't matter who you love. It doesn't matter who they are, that they love you so much. They've been preaching to you all the time. And you feel like you're a Christian, you're not a Christian if you're not a Christian. If you haven't put your faith in Jesus, then that's it. You're just not in. You're just not in. Now, I don't say that to be mean, or I don't say that to be like, see, get out of here. Like that's not what I'm saying. I say that as a call to you. I say that as an appeal, like, hey, to Jesus, you're not in. Please, get in. Come on. Like, I want you here. I want you to come. And if you're watching on Facebook and you're like, I like New Walk, but I just can't be as crazy as they are. Listen, you either gotta be as crazy as we are, or you can't be a part of this. Like, it's the reality. Jesus says, either you're with me or you're against me. There is no neutral. There is no, I'm just there. There's none of that. Apathy will not save you. Revelation 3:15 through 16, speaking of the church at Laodicea, it says, I know your deeds, that you're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. Jesus says, apathy, indifference is not what I want. Apathy and indifference just get spit out of my mouth. Again, I do not say that. I do not say that to condemn. I say that as an appeal. I want you to come and get in. I don't want you to stay neither hot nor cold. I want you to get hot. I want you to come to Jesus and say, no, I'm full on. I am in. I have drawn the line in the sand. I am in. Because that's what Jesus says. You're either with me or you're against me. These are not Rob's words. These are Jesus' words. I love what Joshua says in chapter 24, 14 through 15. He says, now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him with sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, then choose this day whom you'll serve. Whether the gods of your fathers, the gods they served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua got to the point where with his people that he said, hey, no in between, my friends. There's no middle ground here. There's no salvation because my Mima is saved. Like, there's none of that. Are you saved? Have you put your trust in Jesus? Have you believed? Have you made a commitment to Christ? That's what it really comes down to. So my second question to you is, are you indifferent to the truth? When you're confronted with the truth of who Jesus is, do you believe the truth? Are you indifferent to the truth? Or are you denying the truth? That's the third question you need to ask yourself. Are you simply denying the truth? I want us to go back to verse 47. It says this: Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Let me give you a little bit of background here. The Pharisees, there's these, I feel bad for that group, to be honest with you, because I kind of understand them. The Pharisees were this group of people that they were kind of the religious teachers, the people that really kind of had control of the people, even though they were under Roman rule. These people, they were kind of the leaders. They were the head honchos, the chief priests. They were the people in command. So when Jesus came around, Jesus threatened their power. And now they felt threatened by Jesus. They didn't like Jesus very much. They saw the miracles he was doing. And they saw now this whole thing with Lazarus. Like that must have just blown their brains out, right? These people, I feel bad for them to a degree. Like, please, don't misquote me on that. But I do feel bad for the Pharisees because I get it. You're in power. You're feeling really good about the way things are going. People recognize you in the street because you're a Pharisee. You're like, hey, you got your popularity. Things are good. And all of a sudden, this new cat comes to town and everybody's looking at the new cat. And you're like, what is going on? So I kind of feel bad for them in that sense. Like I kind of get it. But the Pharisees did not like Jesus. And when they're confronted by the truth of Jesus, they ask this crazy question. They say, wait a minute, what are we accomplishing? They're saying this Jesus doing miracles, gaining popularity, and here we are, the Pharisees, we ain't got a response for them. We're not doing anything. He's doing everything, and people are starting to flock after him. They asked that, and they said, here, this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Now, this is interesting because the Jews, which is the group that the Pharisees were kind of overseeing, if you will, the Jews, they were living under Roman rule, meaning that Rome had control over them. But Rome was kind enough to give them some autonomy. So they were kind of a semi-autonomous group of people. They could worship in their temple. They could have their own laws as Jews. But at the end of the day, Rome is the boss, right? So they kind of let them be. And here, the Pharisees, what they're saying is, listen, if we let him keep going like this, they're going to take everything away from us. And it was just really a power grab. They just wanted to make sure that they didn't lose their little bit of power and their little bit of influence that they had in Rome. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. He says, you know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. The Pharisees, they don't like what's going on. Jesus is getting all this popularity. They're afraid of what they're going to lose. They didn't have much to begin with, really, but they were holding on to it for dear life. I'm going to cling on to this. And we're just not going to give in to this Jesus guy. And what do we have to do here? We have to kill him. That's crazy when you think about it. That they were willing to violate their own principles in their own law. The Bible said, thou shalt not murder. So maybe, and by the way, they were trying to justify the murder And I'll talk about that in just a moment. They were trying to justify the murder. And the way they were trying to justify the murder, they were trying to call him blasphemous. So it's like, it's not that we want to kill him. Yeah, right. It's not that we want to kill him. It's that the law, our law says we need to kill him. Okay, let's just say that they were being honest about that, which they weren't. But let's just say they were being honest about that. Something really crazy happens in John chapter 12. You know what happens in John chapter 12? They decide, not only are we going to kill Jesus, we're going to kill Lazarus. We're going to kill Lazarus too. So let me just give them that they wanted to kill Jesus because Jesus was blaspheming. So why do you want to kill Lazarus? What was Lazarus doing? Lazarus, all he did was rise from the dead. Wouldn't you do the same thing? If Jesus called you and you could? Well, maybe not, because I'm thinking Lazarus must have been enjoying heaven or at least a little bit of paradise, and all of a sudden they call him back. They're like, oh man, like why I have to go back to earth, right? They wanted to kill Lazarus too. So wait, you were violating your own principles. You were willing to violate your own law. Why? Because you wanted to hold on to power so bad. Please, the Pharisees, they're a sorry group. They are a sorry group. But if we're honest with them, we can kind of see where they're coming from, right? Maybe you're the best employee in your office, and maybe you kind of have that, teacher's pet kind of position at your office, and all of a sudden they hire this newbie, and all of a sudden you see your boss kind of hanging out a little too much with the newbie, and you're like, no, I don't like that, right? Like, we can understand those feelings of jealousy. If you can, I can, and maybe I'm just preaching to myself. I'm good with that too. But I don't know, we get those feelings of jealousy. Somebody else is going to take my place. We get that. But the Pharisees, this is scary where they're at. The place that this jealousy has taken them to, that they're willing to kill Jesus and kill Lazarus. The whole Lazarus thing just makes me laugh because it's like, dude, you kill Lazarus, Jesus just brings him right back. Like, don't try to kill Lazarus. That's a funny one to me. But here's a third question I want you to ask yourself when you're confronted with the truth, particularly the truth about Jesus. Do you deny the truth? Do you deny the truth? Denial causes us to do at least three things. The first thing is that I believe that denial causes us first to fool ourselves. I think that when we deny the truth, we're really not fooling anyone else. We're really just fooling ourselves. Why do I say that? The Pharisees were fooling themselves because they weren't taking a good look at their intentions and their motivations. They really weren't looking at their hearts. They really weren't saying, wait a minute, why do we really want to kill Jesus? Is it really because of the law? After all, remember the whole bit with the woman caught in adultery, right? And Jesus says, okay, fine, we're gonna go ahead and do what you want to do. We're gonna cast the stones, but let's start with the person that, whoever doesn't have sin, let that person go first. And they were there. They're like, it turns out we're all sinners, right? So if we kill her, then guess what? We have to kind of kill ourselves too. And they dropped the stones. They didn't execute her. They didn't kill themselves. So it really wasn't about the law. But I wish some of them would have just took a moment and said, why are we really trying to kill Jesus? Like, why is this really a thing for us? And how about Lazarus? Why are we trying to kill Lazarus? But they were just self-deceived. They were just fooling their own selves. When we deny the truth, we fool ourselves. The second thing is that we miss the evidence. When we denial just causes us to miss the evidence. Let me tell you, when our propensity is just to deny truth, they could bring us all the evidence in the world, and we'll still deny it. We'll still deny it. There will be no amount of evidence that will convince you when all you want to do is deny. there's no amount of evidence. For me, one of the greatest arguments for God's existence is an argument called the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument is a very easy argument. It simply says that everything that begins, that everything that has a beginning, has a cause, right? So you had a beginning, you had a cause. Your parents had a beginning, they had a cause, and so on and so forth. Everything that has a beginning. This stand right here had a beginning. It had a cause. This building had a beginning. It had a cause. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. And that right there, we believe it. All of us believe it. You can tell that to an atheist, and some atheists will tell you, well, because you'll say, well, if everything had a beginning, then the universe had a beginning. If the universe had a beginning, then it had a cause. What was that cause? God was that cause. And then they'll say, okay, then what began God? Well, it turns out the God we preach about, he's eternal. He had no beginning, so he doesn't have a cause. But he caused everything else. He transcends this world. One of the easiest arguments, I think, and I think one of the easiest ones for most people to accept, right? Because we live in a world where things don't just pop up into existence. We live in a world where if we see something, we just naturally realize there's a cause for it. But atheist after atheist will deny the cosmological argument. And they'll say, no, they'll go as far as saying, I forget his name, I'm mixing Richard Dawkins along with Krauss, I'm forgetting his first name. But there's these two famous atheists, and one of them, Dr. Krauss, I'm forgetting his first name, sorry about that, but he actually talks about how something can come from nothing. Something can come from nothing. And you're like, huh? That's impossible. In fact, we don't see that happening anywhere else in our world, that something comes out of nothing. See, I believe it's because denial causes us not only to fool ourselves, not only to miss the evidence. There's plenty of evidence for God beyond even the cosmological argument. But the third thing is that when we deny the truth about Christ, it also causes us many times to violate our own principles. For the Pharisees, they were willing to go against their own law to get rid of Jesus and to even get rid of Lazarus. They were willing to go against it. Atheists that don't want Jesus or God to be a thing, well, guess what? They will go against what they traditionally believe, and they'll violate their own principles. And when we deny, we tend to do that. So, how do we embrace truth? Are we believing the truth? Do we have a propensity to believe the truth when I see the evidence? And by the way, there's got to be a point in our lives where enough evidence is enough evidence. Otherwise, if no evidence is good enough, then you'll just continue to be a denier. But when it comes to the truth, Lazarus is alive. When it comes to the truth, do you believe it? Or do you say, I'm just indifferent to it. I'm just not going to commit, you know? I just don't want to be like one of those crazies at the church. Like, I just don't want to commit. Like, it turns out, when it comes to the truth, you kind of have to commit. You don't get to sit on the sidelines. Because if you don't commit, then you're in the category of unbeliever. And I just want you to know that that's a dangerous place to be. You're no greater than somebody that outright denies the truth. So, do you believe the truth? Are you indifferent to the truth? Or do you simply deny the truth? These people found themselves in one of those three categories. The appeal to you today is that if you have found the truth, commit to the truth, believe the truth, put your faith in the truth. These people had the evidence. They had Lazarus staring at them. They knew what was going on, but because they wanted to cling to their power, they decided, we're going to deny all of this. I want you to know today that if you're here, if you're watching online, if you're hearing this any way that you're hearing it, if this is getting to your ears, I want you to know that Jesus is calling you today. I want you to know that Jesus is calling you today. He is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except by him. He is the truth. He is the truth. And all of us need to respond to the truth. If we don't believe and we're apathetic, even apathy, even indecision is a decision. Jesus is calling you. I want to share with you Hebrews chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. It says something so simple. It says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Why would we harden our heart to the truth? I gave my heart to Jesus in my teenage years. Best decision I ever made, especially in my teenage years. Best decision I ever made. Best decision I ever made. I can stand here before you telling you that God has been nothing but good to me. That doesn't mean I've never struggled or I never had a hard day in my life. That doesn't mean that. Although I do believe that God has protected me from a lot of things. I do believe that. But I will tell you that it's the best thing that's ever happened in my life. And listen, I'm living at the beginnings of it all. Like, I expect one day to see Jesus. I expect one day to be in his presence forever. And man, what a glorious day that will be. And that's where we're headed. And if you're a believer, we can rejoice knowing that that's what's awaiting us. But if you're not a believer, if you just want to stand apathetic, you want to be indifferent, or if you simply just want to deny it, man, I feel really bad for the future that awaits you. And I don't say that as saying I'm better than you, because Lord knows I'm not better than you. And you know I'm not better than you. I went up to a friend one time just playing around with him, and I said, hey, just so you know, I don't really think I'm better than you. And his response was, well, yeah, because you're not better than me. I said, oh, exactly. But can I tell you, today, if you're confronted with the truth about Jesus Christ, believe it. Truth should be believed. Do you disagree with that? Truth should be believed. Do you want to believe something that's not truth? And you're like, but I don't know. I don't know it all. And I get it. I don't know it all. I get it. There's still so much to know. But it all starts with belief. Go with what you do know right now. Go with what you do know. As of right now, go with what you do know. Believe what you do know. And if you learn more than that, then continue growing your faith and your belief. Listen, knowledge for me, by the grace of God, knowledge for me, if it's done anything good in my life, it's just strengthened my faith. It's strengthened what I believe, and it should strengthen what we believe. But don't wait to know it all to make a decision to believe. Just go with what you have now. And maybe you have one or two questions that you need answered really badly. Then ask those questions and find out the answers for those questions. And once you get those answers, you'll see that it's true. Once you get those answers, you put your faith in Jesus. These people, they saw a miracle. They saw Jesus do something. And they had no choice but to believe. I wish that we could all get into that category. Not the doubters, and certainly not the indifferent, but the believers. Let us believe the truth. Let's pray.